I am the Duke of Ashworth, and I have been blind since the fire took my sight at 23. I will not describe the fire. The details do not matter, only the outcome. A wing of the old house, a collapsed beam, the smell of smoke and scorched stone, and then darkness. Not gradual, not merciful, a darkness that fell like a curtain and never lifted. The physicians came from London, from Edinburgh, from Vienna. They examined and conferred and shook their heads. I could hear them shaking their heads, a faint rustle of collar against cravat, a particular quality of silence that means a man is delivering bad news and wishing he were elsewhere. And they told me, one by one, that the damage was permanent. I was 23. I had been the Duke of Ashworth for 2 years. I had an estate of 11,000 acres, a house that was half rebuilt and half ruined, a title that carried weight in 3 counties, and I could not see any of it. I learned to live in the dark. It is not what people imagine, not a void, not a blankness. It is a world remade in sound and texture and smell, a world where a room announces itself by its echoes, and a person by their footstep, and the weather by the quality of the air against your skin. I learned the house by counting paces and trailing my hand along the walls. I learned the grounds by the slope of the earth underfoot, and the sound of the stream that ran along the eastern boundary. I learned to be still, because stillness is a kind of sight. In the silence, the world tells you things it hides from people who are busy looking. My steward managed the estate. My valet dressed me. My housekeeper ran the household. I sat in my study and listened to reports and signed documents I could not read, guided by a secretary whose hand I trusted and whose voice I knew as well as my own. I was competent. I was managed. I was, by every measure the world cares to apply, functioning. I was also alone, and I had accepted that this was how the rest of my life would proceed. Solitary, ordered, and dark. Until the morning, my steward, Harding, stood in front of my desk and said, in the uncomfortable voice of a man delivering news he knows will not be well received, "Your Grace, a Mr. Taverner is in the drawing room. He has brought his daughter." I did not send for a Mr. Taverner. "No, Your Grace. He has come on a matter of," he says, "it is a matter of debt." I knew the name. Taverner had held the lease on the mill at Ashworth Cross for 15 years. He had been a reliable tenant once, before drink and dice had hollowed him out. He owed the estate 3 years of rent, a sum I had not pressed because I knew pressing would produce nothing but misery, and I had no appetite for misery. I went to the drawing room. Harding guided me to my chair, the one by the fire, the one I could find by the heat on my left hand, and I sat, and I waited. Taverner's voice was thin and shaking. He had the sound of a man who has scraped the bottom of every barrel he owns, and is now scraping the floor beneath. "Your Grace," he said, "I know what I owe. 3 years. I cannot pay it. I have nothing left. The mill is failing, the debts are stacked, and I have sold everything I can sell." He paused, drew breath. "Except my daughter." The room went very quiet. "I beg your pardon," I said. "She is 21. She is healthy. She can read and write, and she can keep a house, and she can work. She is not beautiful, Your Grace. I will not lie to you about that. But she is strong, and she is honest, and I am asking, I am begging, if you would take her, as a servant, as a companion, as whatever you need, in exchange for the debt. Take her, and forgive what I owe, and I will never trouble you again." I heard, behind Taverner's voice, the faintest sound, a breath drawn in sharply and held. The daughter. She was in the room. She had heard her father offer her like a horse at market. "Miss Taverner," I said, addressing the silence where I had heard the breath, "do you wish to speak?" A pause, then a voice, low, steady, with a current of iron beneath the composure that I recognized immediately, because it was the same iron I had heard in my own voice on the day they told me I would never see again. "I do not wish to be sold, Your Grace," she said, "but I understand my father's situation. If you will have me, I will come. I ask only that you treat me decently. What is your name?" "Eleanor, Your Grace. Eleanor Taverner." I considered. I was blind. I lived in a house run by servants who were efficient and impersonal. I had no wife, no prospect of a wife, no desire for a wife, or so I had told myself so many times that I had almost come to believe it. I did not need a woman offered in lieu of a debt by a desperate father in a drawing room that smelled of fear and shame. But her voice was the thing, low and clear and unbowed, even as she stood in a room where she was being bartered. I have learned, in 8 years of blindness, to hear what voices carry beneath their words, the confidence or the cowardice, the truth or the performance. Eleanor Taverner's voice carried nothing false. "I will forgive the debt," I said. "Your daughter will stay at Ashworth as a companion, not a servant. She will have a room, a wage, and freedom to leave whenever she chooses. Those are my terms." Taverner stammered his gratitude. I did not listen to it. I was listening to Eleanor, who said nothing at all, which told me more than any words could have. She came to Ashworth the following day with a single trunk, a worn copy of Milton's collected works, and a small cloth bag that clinked faintly when she set it down. "What is in the bag?" I asked. I could hear the glass. "Jars," she said. "Preserves. I made them. I thought, your kitchen may not want them, but they are good. You made preserves. I had time. My father's house was quiet." That was the word she used. Quiet. Not poor, not wretched, not falling apart. Quiet. I understood, in the precision of that word, that this was a woman who had been carrying far more than she was willing to name, and who had chosen to name it gently. I assigned her the room next to the library. It was warm. It caught the afternoon light, and although I could not see the light, I could feel it when I stood in the doorway, and I thought she should have it. Harding raised his eyebrows at the choice, but Harding was accustomed to raising his eyebrows at me, and I was accustomed to ignoring them. The first week was careful. She was careful, I was careful, the household was careful. She took her meals in her room. She walked the grounds alone. She came to the library in the evenings and read. I could hear her turning pages, the soft whisper of paper, and I would sit in my chair by the fire and listen, and neither of us spoke. On the 8th evening, she said, "You are listening to me read." "I listen to everything," I said. "I have no other choice. Would you like me to read aloud?" No one had offered. In 8 years of blindness, no one in this house had offered to read to me. Harding read correspondence because it was his duty. My secretary read documents because he was paid to. But no one had sat in my library and offered to read for the pleasure of it. "Yes," I said. She read Milton. She had a voice made for Milton, measured, grave, capable of carrying the weight of paradise and its loss without melodrama. She read for an hour, and when she stopped, the silence that followed was the best silence I had known in years, full and warm and shared. After that, she read to me every evening. In the second week, she began to extend herself into the house. She discovered that the kitchen garden had been neglected. I could not see it. Harding did not care about it, and the gardener was elderly and overwhelmed, and she asked permission to tend it. I granted it. Within a fortnight, she had rebuilt the herb beds and planted vegetables and restored order to a patch of ground that I had forgotten existed. Then she found the tenants. "The Widow Marsh at Briar Cottage," she said one afternoon, standing in my study with the directness that I had come to expect and to rely on. "Her roof leaks. The north wall is damp. She has a cough. Harding has not reported it. Harding has not visited her since spring. I walked there this morning. She gave me tea and told me about the leak, and then apologized for mentioning it, because she said the Duke has enough to worry about. I sent the builders that week. It was not the last time Eleanor walked the estate and returned with a list of things that Harding had missed, or ignored, or deemed too small to mention. She became, without title or appointment, the eyes I did not have, not only for the grounds and the cottages, but for the household itself, for the small human details that a blind man in a large house cannot see, and that efficient servants do not think to report. The kitchen maid who was homesick, the groom whose wife was ill, the corridor window whose latch had broken, letting in the cold. Eleanor noticed. Eleanor acted. Eleanor did not ask permission, because she understood, faster than anyone I had ever known, that I did not want to be managed. I wanted to be informed. "You are changing this house," I said to her one evening after the reading. "I am tidying it," she said. "There is a difference." "There is not." I heard her smile. I cannot explain how a blind man hears a smile. It is something in the breath, a warmth that enters the air, a change in the quality of the silence. But I heard it, and it was the first time I had made her smile, and I wanted to hear it again. The trouble came in November, when my solicitor arrived from London. He was a thorough man. I relied on his thoroughness the way I relied on Harding's competence, as a scaffolding around the parts of my life I could not reach. He reviewed the accounts, he reviewed the leases, and then he sat across from me and said, "Your Grace, I have completed the valuation you requested." I requested no valuation. The young woman, Miss Taverner, she asked me to value what her father owed, against what her service to the estate has been worth. I was silent. "The debt was £112, the solicitor said. "Miss Taverner has, in 3 months of residence, identified and initiated repairs to 7 tenant properties, restored the kitchen garden to productive use, reorganized the still room, reduced the household provisioning costs by 11% through her preserves and her management of the kitchen stores, and personally attended to 3 tenants who would otherwise have required the parish doctor. My conservative estimate of the value of her contribution to the estate is—" "I do not need the number," I said. "Your Grace, it substantially exceeds the debt, several times over, in fact." I sat in my study after he left, and I thought about this woman who had been brought to my house in exchange for a debt of £112, and who had, in 3 months, given back more than the debt was worth, not because she was obligated, but because it was in her nature, because she could not see a broken thing without mending it, because her hands and her mind and her quiet, relentless competence were as natural to her as breathing. I thought about the sound of her voice reading Milton in the firelight. I thought about the way she entered a room, how I could feel the air change, how the house itself seemed to settle when she was near, as though its stones and timber recognized her presence as something it had been waiting for. I thought about what my life had been before she came, ordered, dark, competent, and empty, and what it had become since, still dark, still ordered, but inhabited, filled, not with noise or fuss or grand gestures, but with the steady, quiet, transforming presence of a woman who saw what needed doing and did it. I found her in the library that evening. I knew she was there because I could hear the pages and smell the faint scent of the herbs she carried with her always. Lavender, rosemary, something green and alive. "Eleanor," I said, "Your Grace, your father sold you to me for a debt of £112. I heard her stiffen. He did. "My solicitor informs me that you are worth my whole estate." The silence that followed was extraordinary. I stood in the doorway of my own library, and I could hear her breathing. Quick, uneven. The breathing of a woman who is trying very hard not to feel the thing she is feeling. "He is exaggerating," she said. "He is a solicitor. He does not know how to exaggerate." I crossed the room. I had counted the steps 1,000 times, 14 from the door to the fireplace, 6 from the fireplace to the reading chair. I stopped in front of her. "I cannot see you," I said. "I have never seen you. I do not know what you look like. Your father told me you were not beautiful. I do not care. I know what your voice sounds like when you read Milton. I know what your footsteps sound like in the corridor outside my study. I know what the house sounds like when you are in it, and I know what it sounds like when you are not, and the difference is the difference between a house and a home. Your Grace, my name is Edmund." "Edmund," she said, and my name in her voice was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. Not seen, not imagined, but heard, in 8 years of living in the dark. "Stay," I said, "not as a companion, not in exchange for a debt. Stay because I am asking you to, and because I think, I hope, that you might want to." "I have wanted to," she said, "since the evening you asked me to read aloud and listened as though the words mattered. They did matter." "I know," she said. "That is why I stayed." I reached for her hand. I found it, warm, calloused, strong, a hand that had scrubbed pots and tended gardens and mended roofs and made preserves and carried the weight of a household that was not hers and had never once complained. I held it, and she held mine, and we stood in the library in the firelight that I could not see but could feel, and the darkness did not matter. We married in December, in the chapel at Ashworth, with the winter light pouring through windows I could not see but could feel as warmth on my face. Harding was witness. Mrs. Payne made the cake. Eleanor wore, I am told, because I asked, a dress she had sewn herself, and flowers from the kitchen garden she had restored. Her father came. I allowed it because Eleanor asked me to, and because I had learned, by then, that her forgiveness was broader and steadier than my own. He stood in the back of the chapel and wept, and I did not hear him speak a single word, and I did not need to. The county talked, of course. The blind duke and the debtor's daughter. The man who could not see, and the woman who was not worth seeing. That was how they put it. The cruel ones. The ones who measure a woman's worth by her face, and a man's by his fortune. They did not understand. They could not. They had eyes, and eyes are the most deceiving organ in the body. They show you the surface, and persuade you that you have seen the depths. I had no eyes. I had only my ears, and my hands, and the instinct that 8 years of darkness had sharpened into something more reliable than sight. And what my instinct told me, from the first evening Eleanor Taverner read Milton in my library, was this: here is someone who sees the world as it is, and does not look away. Here is someone who mends what is broken, and tends what is growing, and stands in the doorway of a room where her father is selling her, and says, I ask only that you treat me decently. Here is someone who is worth more than an estate of 11,000 acres, and I would know, because the estate is mine, and she is the reason it functions. Her father sold her to me for a debt. She was worth my whole estate, and I was the blind man who could finally see.